In this demonstration, we're going to go over an introduction to the Stratusphere API Builder, an easy way to programmatically pull user, application, and network data from your Stratusphere appliance. If you're using Stratusphere 5.7 or later, simply go to your fully qualified DNS name of your Stratusphere appliance /API Builder. This is the Stratusphere API Builder. This is the default screen when you open the API Builder. On the left-hand side of your screen, if you scroll through these basis columns, you'll see different types of information that can be pulled to the first column on the bottom left of the table. Under the drop-down, you see different types of data that can be retrieved from the Stratusphere appliance. Let's start with the Summary Inspector. This inspector contains user, machine type information. You see right now we're looking at users. So these are the usernames the Stratusphere appliance is pulling. Now by clicking Machines, we will expose the machine for each user. Unchecking Users allows us to just display the machines by themselves. Let's go ahead and select a different inspector so you can see the different options and how they work. Let's grab the Applications Inspector from the drop-down. As you see on the bottom left of your screen, we're looking at the Stratusphere app name. But if I go to the basis box and check Process Name, Stratusphere API Builder will retrieve the data and show you the process name for each application name. If I uncheck the application name, Stratusphere API Builder will retrieve the data for only the processes. If I check Command Line, Stratusphere API Builder will retrieve the data for the process names and their associated command lines. That's how this works. So let's go ahead and check Application Name, Process Name, and Command Line. You will see that the data that's returned reflects each of the basis columns, as well as the default associated metrics. In this example, let's choose Application Name and Version. Stratusphere API Builder returns the application name as noted in Stratusphere, which is really the Add Remove Program's registered application name, and shows the associated application version. Let's go ahead and move over to the Search tab. You'll notice the Search tab has two boxes on it right now. That's because we have two bases selected. This allows you to search in each basis independently for a specific string. On the top box in the application name area, we'll search for 7 asterisk, which will produce anything with 7 as the leading character, and asterisk means is a wildcard, anything that follows. Let's go ahead and switch that over to AD asterisk. In this case, we're showing everything that begins with AD, like Adobe Acrobat, Adobe Reader, and so on. Let's go ahead and clear this out for now, which means the API Builder will go ahead and retrieve the data, all the data, and not filter any of it out for the time frame that we have selected, which by default is just 2 hours. We'll go ahead and show you as we move along this demonstration how to change the time frame. Next, we'll select the Columns tab. In the Columns tab, you see there are currently no columns selected because Stratusphere API Builder actually has a default set of columns for each inspector to make it simple and easy. But as I start to check columns, select the columns in the Columns box, they start to appear on the right-hand side of the screen and also start to preview in the table below the data that actually will be returned from these columns. And so we'll go ahead and select a few columns here: CPU, disk, network, disk I/O, KBS. It doesn't really matter which order you select them in. Stratusphere will stack them up in the order you select them, query the data that way. However, you can go ahead and drag and drop these entries in any order, and then when the data comes out either in JSON or CSV, they'll be arranged in the order that you've selected here to make it a little bit easier for you as you're looking through the data. At this point, we'll move over to the Filters menu, which allows us to grab certain columns that are in the Stratusphere database and filter by those columns. In this case, we'll grab CPU used megahertz, and we'll make sure it's equal to or at least greater than 1. And then we can click the plus item here, add another filter, kind of chaining these together, and we'll grab here memory used megabyte, and we'll make sure that's at least greater than 1. So in both of these cases, we're going to make sure it's greater than 1. and then Stratusphere API Builder will go ahead and perform the query and show that to you in your preview table below. So we can go ahead and switch over to the Format tab, but before we do, let's take a look at the right-hand side of the screen. This is where the JSON's building. Everything that we do in this API Builder gets reflected into the JSON, and an API URL gets generated. So notice as we switch over to the Format tab, we go into the Sort column area. What we're going to do here is grab one of the data fields that we want to sort by. So when I select Stratusphere API, Stratusphere app name, and for instance descending order or ascending order, you can see on the right hand side of the screen that JSON box gets updated with the specific entries that I'm choosing, and on the bottom of the screen you see that it's reflected right before your eyes, so you kind of get an idea of what it's going to look like. Let's go ahead and add some more formatting. Let's include the units on the metrics, like megahertz, megabytes, things like that. You can include things like commas on your metrics, or you can include percents on the metrics. For now, we'll just go ahead and do Stratusphere app name and ascending sort. All right, we're going to switch over to the Output tab now. And on the Output, we can select things like use the cached, select your limit, use physical or virtual machines for the data to be reflected, maybe system or user process. We'll select user process in this case, which will return only the processes owned by the user. And so now we're looking at a list of Stratusphere app names that are user-owned, user-launched. Under the Output drop-down, we have an option for CSV only or JSON. With CSV only, you see things that you're probably familiar with, like comma delimited or tab delimited. You can set a type of file name that you want to have sent to you when the API query is done. Let's go ahead and use the JSON mode for right now. Let's move on to the Date tab. On the Date tab, this is where we can select the date range. So for instance, last 15 minutes, last 2 hours, yesterday, last 60 days, etc. We can also select a resolution, so whether you want things just averaged up by the basis entry, or whether you want the basis entry to be broken out into hourly or some other type of by day format. We also can do a custom start date and a custom end date, and a custom time. So if you're looking at the last 30 days, but you only want to look from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. or from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., you can select those filtering options here. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that JSON builds. You can edit that JSON on the API line and change that around any way you want. And of course, append that JSON to the IP address of your Stratusphere server. And beneath here, we've got the whole command line. You can actually click it to select it and right-click it, paste it in your URL, or you can click Launch API, and we'll go ahead and proceed to launch that right now into a browser and retrieve that data for you. So let's just hit Allow once here on the browser options, and the data shows back in a JSON format with your metadata showing first, a little bit of information about the query that you're running. You can go ahead and see some of the bases that you've selected, any filters you might have applied, the time range you ran it for, the resolution being all, meaning it's just rolled up back to the application name here, the basis name in this case, not by hourly or anything. You can see that the columns we selected are specified here. You can easily change any of those on the URL line to your liking. You don't have to use the API Builder for that. And then if you scroll down, you can see the data returned back to you in a JSON format, which could be parsed out programmatically, pulled into your systems, used in your JavaScript dashboards, however you want to use it. And at the bottom, you see there's an XREF area. That's the shows you really the human readable, or the pretty header names, as we like to call them, of the data field, so that you know specifically, in clear understanding, the kind of column of data that you're looking at. Let's go ahead and go back to the Output tab, and we'll test this out a little bit differently by switching it to a CSV only. You'll see that we say output:1 in the JSON area. We actually put a default file name in there. When you use the JSON default method, then of course we take the output type out because it's the default method. You can actually specify it in there still, but removing it also runs the default mode, which is JSON, so it's not in there when we click JSON. Let's go ahead and pick CSV though, and for CSV, again, we can type a file name in. We can choose tab or comma delimited. In this case, we'll use comma, and you'll see that it changes on the right, removes it because it's default. We put it back to tab, and we enter the entry comes back into the right-hand side of the screen. I type in myfile1 on the right-hand side of the screen. It switches the output name to myfile1. It's that easy. You can do all that on the URL line. Let's click Launch API, and let's go ahead and see what that does. I have to hit allow once on my browser. You see it downloads the file. I can go ahead and open that file, opens it into Excel. I can simply grab the first column of data, and then I can do a text to columns selection. Of course, choose that it's delimited, make sure that I've got tab as my delimiter, and then at that point it takes the data and it formats it. I can double click my top left square and double click one of my lines of my columns, and it expands that data out nice and clean. You can also preview that in your browser if you'd like. To do that, you're going to select the third option on the drop down here. Okay, here's the third option. And now when we do that, the options obviously change in the JSON. I go ahead and launch it. I have to hit allow in my browser, and then it pops up and shows you the information on the screen. Kind of give you an idea what that's going to look like. You can obviously copy and paste it from there, but it might be easier to go down to a file and grab it and open it up directly into your application of choice. Let's go ahead and take a look at another real-world example. We'll deselect application name in the Applications Inspector, and we'll go ahead and select a different basis as a starting basis, process name. Now that I have process name selected, the JSON gets updated on the right-hand side of the screen, and the table reflects on the bottom. We'll search for Chrome *. That will go ahead and proceed to show us everything that begins with the word Chrome, no matter what the ending of the word is like. Here's Chrome, average for the last couple hours, all rolled up into one entry. You see the machine, the user count, and so on. We'll go ahead and pick a date range like yesterday. So now all that data for yesterday's averaged up into the one entry for Chrome. But we'll do something a little bit different here. We'll change the resolution, and we'll look at it by hour and actually hourly. So if I was looking at 30 days worth of data, this hourly mode would only give me a maximum of 24 rows, 0 through 24. If I did day hour, I would get each day and each hour, be many more rows, right? So this is just averaging up the last X amount of days, in this case yesterday, and then over a 24-hour resolution. Now let's go ahead and take a different look at this data. Instead of looking at it hourly for yesterday, let's go back to the all resolution, which takes all the data for the time frame and averages it up to the basis, which in this case is process name and search for specifically Chrome. And let's go ahead and add in another basis, and we'll add an owner name. So by adding an owner name, we can see all the people who actually used or owned Chrome for the time frame that we're querying, which is yesterday. All right, let's take a last look at a couple of the options that the API Builder allows, a couple preferences. We'll switch over to and click up into the Preferences section. And in Preferences, you can see that we have a couple options here, not too many. For instance, we've got language. You can choose a Spanish language, a French language, a Japanese language. So it just helps the API Builder communicate a little more natively some of the options within it. And then the data, of course, is going to come through however, whatever language pack you were using when you collected the data on your guest operating system. So that's it for the basics of the Stratusphere API Builder. It's available on all Stratusphere appliances, /API Builder after your DNS name. You do have to have your IP address or subnet in the API authorized list under the administration tab. And if you have any questions, please contact support@liquidwarelabs.com. Thank you very much.